3PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R. Joining me for this episode is Micheal Price. Micheal, how you doing, sir?
I'm great, thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being on. Glad to have your time. How's the weather out in the UK?
We're still doing okay. We've lost the sunshine a little bit now, and now the wind's starting to come down from the north, so it's back to usual, I think.
Yep. Here in Florida, we are preparing for a hurricane again.
I did see that. Yeah, Fiona, isn't it? Hurricane Fiona?
Yeah, they gave it it was number 9 up until today. So that's what they do. So
yeah. Weather change, I'm afraid.
So, Micheal, what got you involved with ufology? What put you on your path?
So I guess what put me on my path with a lot of people who end up in ufology and looking at the UFO phenomena was my own personal sighting when I was 15 years old. So to cut a long story short, I was walking with a friend on the east side of England, where I lived, and we were taking a walk along the beach, and we was walking towards the coast, and we saw and what could only be described as a bright orange ball lift up from the North Sea, clear as day in front of us. And our immediate reaction to that was it's the sun, but obviously realizing we're facing the east, it was 6 o'clock in the evening. The sun was actually setting in the west, and it was March. So we weren't looking at the sun. It then dawned on us that we weren't looking at the sun, and there was an immediate fight or flight response. And like true 15-year-old men, we turned and ran and kept running for about half a mile until we couldn't run anymore. And when we looked back, what we'd seen was gone. We took the time to try and understand what it was that we saw. But I think the difficulty was that what we were looking at was something completely unknown to us. And ever since then, it set me on my path to try and understand what is the UFO phenomena and what does it mean for us as a planet.
Yeah, I'm a weird person. I probably would have ran to that. I tell people this all the time. Like, I'm the guy that dies in a movie right away because I just don't know better. You know, it's like Stupid Brave.
Yeah, well, no, I've watched enough movies to know that you never go in a basement if it's haunted, and you never go in the attic. And that's kept me alive to the age of 51 so far.
When I get in the field eventually, I don't know. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, exactly, sir. But all power to you for running towards it. What you'd have been running towards, we would have had no idea, but it was just something that's burned on my memory. And I think with a lot of people who have had personal UFO experiences, whilst they have difficulty recalling other parts of their lives and things that happened to them, a UFO event seems to be able to be recalled with absolute accuracy, which is bizarre. It just goes to show that when the brain sees something it doesn't know, it continuously plays on it until it figures out what it is.
Well, that's what it is. Our brain's a computer, right? So like I say this a lot, when you walk around your house, you have a pretty good memory of the layout of your home. So most of what you're looking at is your brain replaying stock footage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And when you see something new, the computer's like, what the hell is that? And it processes it until because it's fighting to make sense of what you saw.
Exactly.
And what ends up happening is in some cases, like you're more of a scientific approach. Some people, when they have an experience, their imagination tends to run away a little bit.
Sure.
And so what ends up happening is people like you get out there and you want to know. You got to know. And that's me. I've never witnessed anything in life outside of the United States government videos. And that's what really got me behind UFOs again. Like they're real. Okay. What is controlling them? No idea. But they're definitely a real thing. And you know, it's scary. If you paid attention, this is not just the government, but media all over the world. Yeah. It's like we acknowledge this phenomena, and then it dies down. And it seems like it's intentional. Do you think that?
Absolutely. If we cast the mind back, and you know, I've been in this UFO circle, as I say, since I was 15. I've done a lot of research in the background. You're absolutely right, Adam. I'm very scientific minded in how I approach things. And I remember reading the Brookings Institute report, which was brought out in 1961. And this was commissioned by the US Defense Department. And the question was really simple to the Brookings Institute, which was an institute that was based around psychology, and, basically human sociological reactions to certain events, post World War II, and all the propaganda that came out of that. And the question that was asked the Brookings Institute was, if we was to reveal that UFOs were real and that we weren't the only life form in the universe, what would be the response to that? And if anybody goes online and looks at the Brookings Institute, I think it's about the third paragraph down, and I summarize here, but basically it states, under no circumstances would you want to reveal en masse to the public of the world that UFOs exist. The mass panic, social breakdown, governmental breakdown would be fairly instantaneous. And that really is, to your point, Adam, that when they test the water with these things, I'll throw something out there. Let's see what the reaction is. Let's see if everybody picks up on it. See if everybody goes mad and starts having a mad run on the bank, or, cats and dogs living together, the whole world goes crazy. Or will they just pass it off and absorb it? And I think the interesting thing that we're seeing here is that the public are kind of absorbing it.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether to take that as a plus or a minus. I don't know what your view is on it, Adam, but I'm still on the fence with it at the minute. It's
a bit concerning. I'll tell you why. There's a few parts to the ufology thing. So full disclosure, you have, organized religion calls into question. I think future generations have a hope because, like you just said, it's not that they're just absorbing it. It's like they're desensitized. They've just been fed it so long that when it gets here, like, oh, there it is, and cool, and back to my phone. They get preoccupied. And there's another side to it too. The government's got probably other agendas why they wouldn't fully disclose it, if they could help it anyway. Because eventually, at some point, it's going to be beyond their control. But until then, it's a great smokescreen for any programs they want to work on. It's a fantastic one. They fly a prototype over the United States, and they're like, oh, that's definitely a UFO. Hint, hint. I mean, there's a lot of sides of the coin on that. But like you said, it is a bit concerning that people are just absorbing it and moving past it, which is a good reflection on what it is that the content we make, like all the fake ghosts and the fake UFO stuff. When you put so much of that out there, people, even logical-minded people, are like, they're like, well, who cares? Because they can't discern the difference between what's real or not anymore.
Yeah, and you're right, Adam. And I think you also see as well that when a UFO video appears on YouTube or one of the main channels or one of the main ufology channels that we follow around the world, some people look at that and then they see it. And even if it isn't absolute obvious UFO, it's in 1080p or it's in 4K, it's in focus, it's not grainy, it has legitimacy, it has precedence behind it, it's in reference shot, you can see the distance, you can see the size. Even if, and this again is a reflection of the desensitization that we're talking about, Adam, even if you saw that, you look at the comments, fake.
Yep.
That's fake.
Yep.
How fake is that?
Or it's the devil.
or it's Satan. Yeah, it's Satan, one of Satan's angels who's come out to deceive the world and so on and so forth. And you know what? You're getting me on a different path there. You really are. But I get exactly what you're saying. It's anything but the reality of what that person is seeing.
Well, think about in the 80s when you got good footage. It was shock and awe. People were in it. They're invested. Now, if you get good footage, 9 out of 10 times the guy that made the fake footage, his looks better. Yeah,
well, you're right. You're right. And the Calvine photo, which has just recently been released, which is a famous UFO case up in Scotland in 1981, which was taken by a couple of hikers. A photo that was taken by them as a diamond-shaped UFO was buzzed by 2 RAF Harrier jump jets, which were our aircraft of choice for the military back in the 80s. And that photo was just recently resurfaced after the MOD buried it from the original photo, the original person who took the photo. And even now, we're now putting this under analysis, and there's still those sat on the fence going, no, this is just too real to be true, rather than let's have a look at the scientific evidence and the data behind it to actually establish whether it is true or not. And I think we're losing that. We're losing the need to be scientifically objective about what we're looking at.
And, it's pretty intelligent on it. If you look at the U.S. government, for an example, in there, I pay close attention to these quote unquote disclosures and these Senate meetings. And it's when you look at a room and you see a lot of the acronyms that are investigative acronyms are not present. You don't see the pilots who firsthand witnessed this. They're not present. And the questions, it seems to me, is rehearsed.
Yeah,
it's like they're disclosing, but they're also downplaying it immediately. Like I heard him in the very beginning ask one of the gentlemen, like, "Is it true that you're into science fiction movies?" Well, what does that have to do with the facts?
Well, exactly. And people make distinctions there on the fact that your past history must have a reflection on what you believe right now and what you see and what you do.
Yeah, but based on that same logic, it's like asking a homicide detective, well, is it true to you like true crime movies? Well, yeah, of course. It sharpens the mind. It allows me to,
it's part of my job. It's how I do my research. You're right. But I tell you what really does worry me at the moment, Adam, is the national security threat narrative.
Yeah.
That is being bounded about.
Seriously. And to that same point, I'm glad you said that. National security threat. They threw that language around a lot. And yet, with that, in that same room I speak of, no acronyms, no military presence, no Air Force presence. Nope. If it's such a threat, you would have a full room of people in high positions in every outfit to address this. Not just the cronies. They said, all right, let's throw these guys up there and let's, we'll jabron the whole thing down, which is what they did. And it's embarrassing.
But I mean, I've got to say, as a UK citizen watching the congressional hearings, and I was one of those sad enough people to actually watch it live as it happened. And then the two guys that they wheeled out from the Defense Department, which was quite frankly, which was very clever on the Defense Department, because if you want to wheel out two idiots who really do not do the subject justice and quite frankly are two fantastic patsies that you want to throw under the bus, then these two guys were the two guys that you want to put in front of a bunch of senators, because, I mean, even for the first 30 minutes, I mean, some of the questions that were asked and the answers that you got. Are you familiar with any other programs prior to ATIP? No, I'm not. Are you kidding me?
Right, exactly.
Blue Book, Grudge, Sign. What were you doing? I mean, you have all this information.
They even asked a question about the UFOs and the nuclear weapons. And I mean, this isn't like, look, these guys have top clearance, right?
Yeah.
There's children that know about that.
Yeah.
And this guy, I've never heard of it.
Yeah, it's crazy. I have to say, I was embarrassed for U.S. citizens to have these two guys roll up. That was the first congressional hearing on UAP. And I'm not necessarily sold on the UAP nomenclature, by the way, because I think that's more government driven, because they wanted to move away from the UFO terminology. Right. But I think the UFO terminology is still very, very applicable today. But if you UAP it, then you're kind of spinning it on its head a bit. But I'm still not sold on that change in narrative. But I mean, to watch it, and I thought, they should have taken this a lot more seriously than they did. And even the ability where they couldn't even stop the video on the point where the pilot was looking out the cockpit. I mean, he was going backwards and forwards for 2 minutes trying to stop it on the right point. It's like, guys, do you even understand IT? I mean, it's not difficult.
And that was a scary part, that they were making that presentation and they were like, I don't know what I'm doing. It was scary. Yeah. And to your point with the language too, that's, it's common in government and it's also common in industry, right? With commercials, when we want to sell something, we change the language a little bit. We alter the verbiage to make it more appealing. Hence why this UAP thing, because the UFO has such a stigma in it. They won't even, here's an example. I speak to a lot of people of religion, both on and off podcasts, and with a very minor person that might agree, the majority of them say it's us from the future. They're not willing to say that it's, life from another planet, dimension, or otherwise. They're not willing to accept that. So when you fold that all into the same category, with the government's doing stuff, you can't use UFO, it's a stigma, and we're going to look foolish. It's the same as the religious people saying, this bush is on fire and it's telling me how things are going to be and we're going to take notes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But I think the challenge that not only the US has, but I think the challenge that globally that we have is that not everybody's running at the same speed. And you look at some of our neighbors, France, Belgium, to name but two. France are pretty open about the UFO phenomena, and they're pretty open about reporting it. They have a system and a process in place which enables their military and their civilian pilots to be able to submit cases through to their Ministry of Defense without any comeback on them. As where that wasn't the case with the US and the UK, you were pretty much grounded from that point. And I think the fact that I don't think is that the USA are trying to catch up. I think the USA are trying to dodge a bullet because they know it's left the gun and it's on its way. And it's who can we stick in front of the bullet, because somebody's going to have to take it. I
agree, because look at this pattern. You see the superpowers, China, Russia, America, UK. We're the ones suppressing it mostly, right? Like you said, France are a little more open to this. A lot of other countries are open to this. It's always the countries that are like, well, we could test our stuff and blame it on that. They don't want disclosure. I mean, it's a great smokescreen. Yeah, it is. Well, the Belgium, the Black Triangle wave of 1980s in Belgium. So the first thing that they came out with is that this is the US government just playing about with future technology, and they're just invading our airspace. To which the Belgians first turned around and said, there is no way in hell the US are invading our airspace without us knowing about it. Right. I mean, that's an infringement of our country's liberties. So they wouldn't be doing that. But there was automatically a need to try and wrap it around some future technology in order to deflect away from what it actually was. Agreed. If we were to do that, it wouldn't be over Belgium. No. It would be somewhere like China where, oh no, that was definitely a UFO. Where they're spying, definitely a UFO. It's in that same meeting, the congressional hearing, where were the videos from the pilots? And not just America, the world over. There's a bunch. Since I've learned about those videos and I did some research, it's not an isolated incident. It's pretty consistent. Yeah. So where are these at? Why that video they used for an example? What a joke! Like, it was like the worst. There was so many more to select from. They chose that one. Well, absolutely. And why did they choose that one? Because it didn't really tell us anything in terms of what we could see. So it was a pretty good bet that nobody could stick their finger on that and go, I see exactly what that is, and there's no way that you can wriggle out of that, U.S. Navy and the U.S. Defense Department. Right. But interestingly, I found that I was just reading this morning, you probably saw this as well, Adam, that the owner of Black Vault had put in a Freedom of Information request to release more of the UFO videos, the ones from the US Navy. He received a response back from that. And that response was basically, we're not going to release those because of national security concerns and that it could expose United States defense vulnerabilities. Yeah. Well, I find that a very interesting response. It used to be, what the hell are you talking about? There's no such thing as UFOs. And now it's moved to, those UFO videos, we can't show you those ones. Because, exactly. But it's a mission without the omission. That's exactly what it is. They're admitting it without admitting it. Yeah. And that's concerning. If they could pull that, that's another way of saying, well, it's freedom of information, but we can't tell you this because there's always a loophole. It's scary. For me, when I watched the Tic Tac video, when that thing it veers off to the left, you're unimpressed when you first look at it until you start doing when you start researching what the speeds you're looking at. Yeah, it's mind blowing because jets can't break lock like that. The fastest jets on the planet, if they bank left and pull hard, they can't break lock that. That's crazy. There's a new respect for that. And then from what I'm told, that was just a small maneuver, considering it then went from one point to the cap point instantaneously. Yeah. So there's a lot that the government they don't disclose it. And to be fair, there are still a lot of people on planet Earth that don't kill other people because they're afraid of going to hell in the terms of the Bible, Yeah. And so if you express to people, well, there's life elsewhere, and they're like, well, I thought God only made here, which is a silly thing. Because I think if there's an alternate, if there's a higher power, an almighty, it made life everywhere. You know, we're one of very many projects out there. But that being said, if you tell people there's like in their belief system that there's aliens are real and potential God's not real, then mayhem. There's going to be mayhem. There's no question of that. But it's one thing to drip feed and kind of keep people in suspense, or to, you know, have the governments of the world speak with religious figureheads and come to a consensus of how we could educate people to, you know, accept the idea, like, even though the Vatican's not dumb. They're like, oh, yeah, well, they're God's children, too. And they should definitely come here and tide some money, you know. They're not dumb. They're a business at the end of the day, so they get it.
Well, they are.
But there's a lot of religious groups that are, you know, they don't accept. I was related to these people. I know. They're like, nope, God made here, and the rest of that's a devil, you know, so... It's
and do you know what I think? So, look, at the end of the day, you and I, Adam, as well as a lot of people that are respectful of other people's positions, and we completely get that. But you know, there's also a tipping point here where it's, you know, oh my God, are you not listening to what you are seeing here? Are you not paying attention to everything that's happening around you? And as you say, there's some religious groups that will say, well, God just made life here, and then, you know, you look at the Drake equation, and then you look at what the James Webb Telescope is now starting to discover, and you think, listen, guys, you know, the Milky Way is 100,000 light years across. Now, if you take the reevaluated Drake's equation alone, then there are billions of potential habitable planets just within the Milky Way alone. And we are just one small galaxy in a large cluster of galaxies across the universe. Bearing in mind as well, we've only been around 4.3 billion years as a planet. The universe has been around 14.2 billion years. So somebody's got a head start on us by about 9 billion years, whoever that is. And quite frankly, you know, there was a cocktail of situations that allowed our life to be created here, and carbon is the most ubiquitous chemical in the universe. So the possibility of it actually happening on another planet are just as good.
I agree. You know, there's a few things to that. Like you said, the Milky Way in itself, just our galaxy, not the many billions we're finding now, just our galaxy. It takes 100,000 years for a radio wave to cross this now. Yeah. Even if there's a civilization out there that's 25,000 years ahead of us, we still haven't gotten their broadcast. It's 100,000 years. And we've only been broadcasting for maybe 110, 150 years, somewhere in that window at a large scale. Yeah. There's no shot that they're going to hear about us yet. It's a very big galaxy. And like you said, there could be, like, and I say this a lot on the show, there's probably planets where they're still in their Stone Age or they're in their Bronze Age. And if they are more advanced than us, they've gotten to see our broadcast. If they are been around for, let's say they're 100,000 years ahead of us. They got our broadcast. Like, these people are crazy. We'll watch them. They're interesting, but we're definitely not hanging out with them. You know, and there's those factors. So people, and even now with James Webb, we're even calling the Big Bang Theory into question. Well, this universe might be infinite, not just 14 billion years old. It might be forever, an infinite number. Which now the possibilities of life in other galaxies is phenomenal. And then if you think in terms of small bubbles of universes, I got depressed one night, Michael. I was sitting at the house, started learning more about space and seeing the size of these black holes and learning how huge the universe is. And it puts you in the perspective of how important you really are. You know?
100%. And currently at the moment, I'm studying as a degree. I'm studying astrophysics and planetary science, and you know the things that you learn as part of this are, you know, as you say, are quite mind blowing. But my professor, we was attending one class, and my professor was asked the question by one of the students, do you think there's life outside of Earth? You know, it's a simple question. We were talking about life starting on Mars and what that would look like. So it was in context to the whole conversation that we were having. And this professor was quite an enlightened individual, and I was quite impressed by his answer. And he says, let me put it this way. He says, if you just take the Milky Way as it is, and where we are positioned currently in the Milky Way, you look at the center of the Milky Way, it's a huge concentration of stars, which most galaxies are, because most of the action happens in the middle. Is you've got to consider and use this analogy. If you was out for a drive one day in your sports car with your wife and you didn't have your sat nav on and you were just going for a random drive, and suddenly you come across this village that you didn't even know existed with 3 houses and a park, and it looks really quaint. He says that's pretty much how other life would stumble across us. He says there's no necessary map that they're looking in order to go and come and find us. For some life forms, they're probably just stumbling across us because we're some remote neighborhood out on the sticks, the Milky Way galaxy, and they've just come across us. But to your point earlier, Adam, you're absolutely right. They could look at us and go, "Do you know what? These guys kill each other on a regular basis. They've obviously not elevated on any spiritual level, really. They still think there's only one guy that's running the show. And, maybe we should just observe them and just keep our distance."
Agreed. And here's the other thing, too, with the universe. There might be some scary stuff that happens out there, but it's pretty consistent as far as galaxies, planets, and how we're starting to see solar systems behave like mechanically, like almost like a Swiss watchmaker, right? Yeah. So that being said, a lot of pushback from people like, well, why do aliens have 2 arms, 2 legs, and heads like us? Maybe we're just projecting ourselves onto that, what they appear like. Well, no. Here's the rules of the universe. If it isn't broken, don't fix it. If it seems like the cosmic web, down to a spider's web, down to the cells that we look at under microscopes, the construct's pretty similar. It doesn't change. Yep. And so when you look at the mechanics of our solar system versus the mechanics of other solar systems, outside of the irregularity of planet size or subtle differences, it's pretty consistent. And
100%.
And so life elsewhere, maybe it's in a red star, solar system, and maybe their pigments are different, or their eyes are different, but at the end of the day, the construct's the same.
Yeah.
And so that's what people, and I hear that the most. That's one of the biggest forms of pushback is like, well, no, we just bipedal creatures, it's our imagination. Sure, there's probably planets out there where they're an octopus because a water environment, they can't escape it. But they've learned to evolve,
Potentially. Enceladus will be an example of that. If you look at Enceladus in our own solar system, NASA have now just recently revealed that that this is possibly an habitable ocean underneath it. Not to say that it is, it's that it's a habitable ocean underneath it because it's warm enough to be able to allow for carbon, which is one of the most complex molecules in the universe, to actually form, and in doing so obviously start to create life in some shape or form. Now, it may be 8-armed octopi, it may be 4-armed octopi or whatever, but it's probably going to be water bound. But the reality is that, it's pretty much, the galaxy is pretty much a blueprint. And when you look at that, you think, well, okay, so this exists and this exists, therefore that equals that, basically.
Right.
And there's no messing about with that formula. If your planet is in the habitable zone of a sun and it's warm enough and it's not too hot and it's not too cold and there's liquid water available on that planet as well as land, then the chances of life forming are probably the same as they are here.
Yeah, and that particular moon that it's has heat coming from its core, and I believe it's from friction from another moon and then its host planet, pulling upon it. And that being said, if there is life in there, whether it be an octopi or bacteria, I predict in the next decade, because we're sending probes there, I predict we're going to find something. And then and even if they find just plankton, it's going to call some of the religious fanatics into question, even if it's just plankton. I did hear from another, well, maybe we polluted it. Like, okay. I don't think you understand evolution, even if it's bacteria. It didn't happen overnight. It takes millennia, So,
yeah.
But but you imagine you go to a planet like that, it's all water-based, right? So there's no really electronic technology, and they have complex language. They just can't escape their environment. But if you go there, you would find that they're equally as intelligent. They could probably speak a very complex language that we could learn, and we could, learn to communicate with them. But they can't escape their environment. They're locked. It's a water-based planet. So it excites me.
No, absolutely, sir. Absolutely. So, and your point on the Vatican as well is a really interesting one, because I know the Vatican, we know the Vatican are seriously taking a looking at the UFO phenomenon have been for many years now. Even, the astronomy department of the Vatican, they've been looking at this, and they're already starting to position the narrative. To your point, it's like, oh yes, well, they're just an extension of God's children, or whatever narrative that they want to use. But anything that's going to appease 1 billion Catholics is basically going to be their focus, I think.
Yeah, of course, because they don't want to relinquish their power, so they have to have an explanation. And so they bought telescopes, and there's like, well, God made everything, and and I forget which one said it, but one of the cars like, we'll baptize them.
Right.
So you want a really intelligent species who bridge the universe or just learn how to bridge the gap of time using portals. You want to baptize it? They can't hear
exactly. Let's just dunk it underwater, put a cross in the head, and tell it go with God. That's not going to happen.
They had to accomplish these feats behaving like a species that didn't have religion, didn't have politics, didn't have race. None of that shit mattered. They had to behave like a species. Like Elon, and I say this on the show, and I repeat it a lot. Elon Musk wants to go to Mars to terraform, and when he hands the application out for that, you're not going to see the box asking for your race, religion, or otherwise. It's going to be, what can you contribute to planet Mars?
Yeah,
none of it matters
100%.
outside of that.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, which, do you know what? I think at the end of the day, that's how you start to evolve. You start to look at what contribution can everybody make in order for the greater good, rather than, who are you as a person? Do you have enough money, or do you not have enough money? Or do you believe in God, or do you not believe in God?
Yeah, and it's scary because we're an intelligent species, and there's a species that's less intelligent than us, and they seem to have that down pat, and they're called ants.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, you look at ants, you think, oh my God, these guys are really well organized. You know what I mean? I mean, they've got all of their stuff together, which is great. But then I think, I am a true believer in the fact that extraterrestrial life forms will look at us and will think to themselves, this species are just too fragmented and violent. I'm not even sure they can elevate beyond a type 0 civilization. I think they'll probably destroy themselves before they even get there.
I would think, so let's say they find us thousands of years ago. They're like, wow, look at these people. They're throwing rocks at each other. They're hunting and killing. They seem to have a language. Although when they found us, it wasn't the greatest language, but a language nonetheless. And so they're doing a study long term. And I've said this on the show plenty of times. If they're going to do a hybrid program, if that's what's alleged, that doesn't happen in a generation. Millennia has got to pass before that's perfected. But at the end of the day, it might be like National Geographic. They can't get involved with us directly. That being said, if they were ever going to communicate with us and try to elevate us or educate us or help us, it would be after a massive collapse. They're not going to come to us now. We're at the peak of who we are. We're almighty. There's a lot of powers around our planet. It's going to be when we get something happens between us where we destroy one another, and we are back to the Stone Age. But we're smarter than we were in the Stone Age. But now we made a tragic mistake, and that's when they come to us to help. Yeah. If they were going to do that,
I fully agree. So, I fully agree. But then again, this comes back to the narrative that's being pushed by the United States, and the fact that that there's a potential national security threat here. I mean, the reality is that if any extraterrestrial life form was a existential threat to humanity, they wouldn't have waited for us to create the nuclear weapon before they did it.
No, I agree. Yeah, harnessing the power of the sun in the tip of a missile. Yeah, they weren't hanging around to attack till that point.
No,
hypothetically speaking, if there was a resource here they wanted, they wouldn't want it depleted by what we were doing. So clearly, we're a study, in my opinion. Because I had who was it? A friend of mine brought out to him, and he goes, "Well, how do you know they're not here to enslave us? Like, why are they waiting thousands of years? They could have got us back in the Bronze Age when we were just smart enough to understand what our position would be." And, and we couldn't damage the world here they would enslave us upon. So I always look at our observers the same way as we, us for the animal kingdom. We find a new species of animal, like, wow, these are amazing. Set up the cameras. Let's watch this let's see how they evolve over the course of the next 5 decades.
Yeah.
Do you remember the show Big Cat Diary?
I do.
I love that show. Yeah. They followed those around generation to generation for a very long time, that filming. That wasn't, I think people have this idea like, oh, they filmed that in the summer. Like, no. You get to watch one from birth, and then it becomes a mother, and then it has its own litter. And they did this for a very long time. But now imagine that on a scale that up to our observers to watching us, to our generations and our feeds. It's you know, we can't like, well, why would they, you know, it's been a few hundred years to what we know anyway. Why would they wait thousands? Why wouldn't they? They would. This is an observation. We're a project, and we're also entertaining. It's an indefinite project as far as they're concerned.
Quite possibly. And the Black Knight satellite, I think, is one potential example of that, of something that's just basically a probe that's observing everything that's going on. You know, we've seen various suspected photographs of what the Black Knight satellite is, and its orbitable pattern, which is frustrating the hell out of the US Space Force because they can't seem to pin it down.
Right.
Which I'm sure is an embarrassment to them. And, you know, even with the sophisticated technology that we have at the moment, that observation post, I think has probably served any potential extraterrestrial civilization with a lot of information over time, like the Big Cat Diaries, where you've just watched this development. It'd be interesting to see them plot it on a graph in PowerPoint to take it from they killed one person to, oh, it's 4.7 billion now. That's quite a hockey stick graph there over, you know, the space of only a couple of thousand years.
Yeah, and so the ones that are here are science-minded, right? They're here for that observation purpose. Now imagine they're sending these signals, however they may do it, to their home planet or home ship, whatever, and we're also entertaining to watch. They probably got every channel you could think of. Like, there's what do we have here? Gang violence, world wars. Like we are like, every movie we've ever watched compares none of the shit we've done. You know?
No.
So for them,
it's a unique way of looking at it, actually. And I've never thought of looking at it that way.
You have to, because look at it. Remember the Truman Show, the movie, where we same concept, right? Like they're like, there's probably a planet out there watching us. Like, wow, we're watching this family's generations. Or there's another channel with the Kennedys, there's a channel dedicated to the UK. But this makes sense to me because, and that's where I think people fail to understand. There's another pushback. I'm going to be doing a series on abduction. I'm going to have people of experience coming on to talk about their experiences for me to help me discern the differences. But at the end of the day, it's still a science project. In the beginning, for the ones that are here currently, the ones that are observing from far away, watching the channels and getting entertained, different subject matter. How do we know they're not following our baseball, football?
We don't. How do we know they're not Dolphins fans? Who the hell knows?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of food for thought.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm part of one of my roles is I'm a member of the Experiencer resource team at MUFON, and it's interesting. The Experiencer subject is a very interesting one, and I'm glad that you're doing something dedicated to it, Adam, because I don't think it gets enough airtime for the understanding of what it is, because the experience event is different for different people.
Right.
And I think what we tend to see, or what the media tends to capture, is the experiencer events that don't turn out that great.
Well, yeah, because it's fantastic and you can make a movie out of it.
Yeah.
Right. They don't want to hear about the guy that goes every Thursday and they're like, well, here's my blood. They don't care about that. That's not fantastic. No. They want to hear it. So maybe I'll ask you this question. Do you find a lot of the people that go into aggression and scream and freak out are alpha-minded people? Because I find most people that are open-armed and accepting of this have no issue. It's the people that don't want to relinquish their control or their strengths, like, you know, military people, police, or anyone alpha-minded. They're the ones that have the freak out.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting question, Adam, and I don't know whether there's any real clear statistics on that. If you was to take the incidents in Nome, which back in the 80s, I think late 80s, early 90s, in Nome in Alaska, where there was a series of abductions that were taking place, and then there was a number of regressions that were recorded by a hypnotherapist, who in herself eventually got embroiled in the whole abduction and the experiencer situation. For some of those individuals, for them, there was a sense of control. They had control of their lives, and they knew what was going on, and you know that everything was in a particular bucket, and you know for them, life carried on. This hypnotherapy regression that they went through, then suddenly made them realize that they're not in control.
Yeah.
And that lack of control for some of them had disastrous consequences because it essentially broke them.
It's a good, so a good point to that, to add on is, some of the off podcast interviews I do, and I do a bunch. It's the military and the cop guys that they have a hard time swallowing the pill of this, right? Even if it happens to them, it's enlightened-minded people or people. If you were to get abducted, Michael, right? Like me, you'd probably be like me. Like, well, first off, before you guys probate it, let's talk about it. Let's negotiate. You have all this technology. What do I get out of this? Take me every Thursday, take me every Tuesday. That's cool. How do we work this out? But that's us. Other people don't like. An example would be like my grandfather. Just a stern person, very used to being in control of. Strong-minded person. If he gets abducted, it's a nightmare to him. It's an absolute because he has no control over the situation. No. And I'm finding a pattern of this, and I'm getting so when I'm doing this run with. In fact, I'll involve you with it. The abduction series I'm doing. I also have I have Kathleen Martin coming back on in November to help me. Yeah, she's gonna help me guide the line of it. I want to do a study on it because I really feel like the people with the pushback are people that are like convicted religiously or they're just alpha minded. And I want to find that out. And if that's the case, and here's another thing. People are like, well, why are the abductions different for everyone? Or why do different people? Why smarter people, dumber people? It's science. You're not going to get the same exact thing and run the same study. That's not science. You're not finding new stuff.
No, no. I met Kathleen back in 2019 at a UFO conference in the UK that she came over to, and I had a conversation with Kathleen then, and she's lovely. And I find that when it comes to the experience, certainly the experiences that I've spoken to and that I've researched cases with, so far none of them have been military or police officers or individuals within a position of authority. And I completely get your point. If you're military or police, it's not, hey, let's just have a chat about this, maybe put together an agreement every Tuesday, Thursday at 9 o'clock because I know I'm going to be available the rest of the week. I'm doing the soccer run for the kids. Don't come and get me then. But with the military is, honey, go get my gun. Because, I need to defend myself because that's what I do. That's my job. I protect. And if I can't protect and I'm not in control, that's a problem for me. Yeah.
When I say I've spoken to, like most of the people I've spoken to in the abduction for the off podcast, out of all of them, only 3 represent military police that were high position. Yep. And when I ask them on the show, they don't want to because they don't want the exposure. And I don't blame them. I get it. But at the end of the day, how many out there how many alpha minded men and women don't come forward because of that position they hold? And they
hundreds.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's a scary number, Yeah. And what they don't realize is it's damaging the data, the science that we need to wrap our heads around this.
Excuse me. Yeah, absolutely is. And you're right, Adam. It is science. I mean, you get a cross section of society. You get a better understanding of what that society is. And as you say, it's not about extraterrestrials taking the brightest, the nuclear physicists, the theoretical physicists. Those are the guys that we want because they add some value to us. It's not about that. It's also grabbing the housewife or grabbing the farmer or grabbing the kid that's just driving down the road at midnight and he's just in the middle of nowhere. You know what I mean? That's how they build their data.
Well, I mean, here's another example too. Like in Alaska, when you were talking about the 80s, 90s, it slowed down. Why did it slow down? Study's over. Because when they first think about the 70s, 80s, 90s, when Alaska, they were trying to lure people there to live. They were giving incentives like, tax breaks and some annual money. And so our observers are like, well, what are they doing in this cold area? What are they eating? What's changed there? We need a project. They ran their project. They discovered what they needed. They're done. Real simple, And if we would treat abduction and experiencers and contactees and treat this like a symbiotic relationship between us and our observers, because the science needs to go both ways.
Yeah.
We need to understand it. And I think once we do, it'll lessen the blow to it. Like for me, for an example, I don't think they'll ever come pick me up. Why? Well, I asked too many questions. He's got a podcast. We can hear his mind. We don't actually have to grab this guy. He's a pain in the ass, right? So, but for some people, There's a gentleman I've been speaking to. He's going to be on the podcast soon. I'm not going to say his name yet, but he'll be on within the next couple of weeks. They're preparing to do a documentary about him, about his incidents and his contribution to society. As far as like, he's not a scientist, he's not a cop, he's not any of this stuff. What I am starting to learn about him is he is pretty unique as far as like he's always healthy, right? I mean, he works basic jobs. But his disposition, he lives a very simple life, and he's extremely healthy with no vitamins. I mean, I ask these questions to, they don't realize when I'm asking them, like, hey, man, what kind of vitamins do you take? None? Okay. How often do you get a cold? Never. When's the last time you had a flu, COVID? Nothing. So in my mind, like, all right, well, maybe they're downplaying this guy because he's not per se a rocket scientist, but he doesn't get sick. And that gets me interested as a human, let alone an observer.
And there must be some uniqueness. I mean, every one of us has a uniqueness, definitely. And, if you do for one guy that, is always healthy, I mean, you can pick me up and rattle me and I'll shake. I mean, I'm taking that many different tablets. Do you know what I mean? But I think for when you look at experience cases in the wider context, it would be really interesting to understand the historical position of those individuals, not just the point where they were abducted, but what's happened in the previous life where there's some commonalities. And again, this comes back to data that we were talking about earlier, Adam, because I think, in order to do that, if you can understand the history of the individual, because some of these are multiple experiences, so this has been happening since they were kids. And for others, it's a one-time thing. But the history of those individuals, there must be something of consequence with that person, which must be of interest in order for that experience or event to happen. Yeah,
maybe it's something in their ancient genealogy, right?
Maybe. Maybe.
That data is very important. And what we need to stop doing is shunning these people of experience or MUFON's a great organization.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they don't get funded the way they should. Like if the government, I said this a lot, if the government has such issue with like, well, we don't want to open up another thing that the public knows anyway, because, we don't want to deal with the stigma. Go ahead and send some money over to MUFON. Give them some kind of resource and funding. Let them do the work. And then if something appealing that they find, then take the helm. But don't sit here and put it down and not fund another group. It makes no sense. We're never going to get proper data, ever.
No.
Not like that anyway.
We have a wealth of it in MUFON. I mean, 100,000 plus cases. And, just a simple artificial intelligence engine, some data science behind it. You could probably pull out a lot of data points there that will suddenly draw a straight line to something. And, it'd be great that if we could have the funds to do that, because if we can do that, I think the insights that we could find from this data and all these cases would, I think, surprise a lot of us.
I agree. The case of Whitley Strieber.
Yeah,
I read a little further. If you look at Whitley Strieber, he's written books, fiction, both fiction and nonfiction. He's a really intelligent guy, and he thinks way outside of the box. I would study that guy if I'm a species from elsewhere, and I happen to catch a novel. This is before he even wrote about communion, right?
Yep.
He wrote some interesting stuff, and they read this like, what makes him think this way? We need to know.
Yeah.
Of course, they're going to take him. So
they are. And but I think the thing that I think stuck in my throat more than anything with Whitley was that his history was the reason why the debunkers suddenly jumped on the train to basically say, listen, this is your job. You've got to have an imagination about things. You sell books, you want to sell more books. Therefore, you come up with this great story here, which has got everybody involved. You put yourself in the first person there. And in doing that, you've now got this captive audience and a new genre that maybe you could move forward with. But, that kind of reaction to an event that Whitley went through, which clearly altered not only his life, but his wife and his kids and those who knew them. Would a person really go to that extent to unravel their life, something that didn't happen?
Of course not. And let's go back to earlier. So, wow, this guy's solving a lot of cases. He's the greatest homicide detective we've had in years. What's this special? Wait a minute. He watches CSI? No, we can't take his work for real. That's the same logic.
Exactly.
So he's written some fantastic books. He's got a fantastic mind. Makes me want to study him.
Yep.
You know,
100%.
I've spoken to a guy. I came with this other theory, and so you work with the experiencers, right? And there's been a bit of a slowdown of direct contact with our observers. I've been noticing anyway since like 2006, and I came to the idea that we have cameras and microphones in every house now, surveillance everything. Yeah. It's too easy for them to monitor us. The only time they would really need to come to us and physically get involved when they need to replace some hardware, or they got to do a procedure. Outside of that, they don't need to anymore. We made it too easy, Yeah. And that goes back to the entertainment factor too. It works both ways, science and entertainment. In fact, look at our entertainment. Everything we have today that we love, the internet, streaming, GPS, all of it came from military applications in science.
100%. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we don't realize it. Microwave CDs, everything like that. Who had that first? Oh, the military. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So what else the military got? Oh, well, you wouldn't believe what else.
Well, yeah. Look at X-rays. X-rays. We found out on accident. We were blowing shit up and testing it, and then we were seeing there was a prints of things on the rocks. We're like, wait a minute, this could see inside of stuff, and it became now it's an application for medical. Practical use nonetheless. So
yeah.
It's dangerous business to cast doubt on anything without really researching it. There's a lot of these naysayers, and they're like, I literally listened to this guy, Michael. I heard this guy try to debunk the Tic Tac video.
I think I know the same guy you're talking about. He came up with some great ones.
What a nut that guy is. Like, how dare you call people crazy and say the things you're saying? That sounds crazier.
Well, it did. And I think, you know what? I think not only did he debunk it, but I think he took a very negative position of the whole thing. And I think that's really what unraveled him. In terms of anybody trying to take his debunking seriously. If you don't want to believe, that's fine. That's your prerogative. But if you don't want to believe, don't believe on the science. Just don't believe on a point of view. Look at the evidence, look at all the data, and then determine if you want to believe or you don't want to believe. But if you want to debunk it based on actual factual data. Don't debunk it based on what you think you know.
Right, because what he did is exactly what he's accusing people of. He's using his imagination based on, minuscule things he's learned over the years.
Yeah,
that is not a fair evaluation. I didn't see a team of scientists there. He didn't have a poll of people. He just shot in the dark at what his imagination versus his somewhat education could find the middle ground in. And guess what? Yeah. That's exactly what I do when I form theories about what I think the little gray guys are. I think they're biological robots with the consciousness uploaded to them. You could rent them out. But that's not science fact. That's my imagination based on data I've collected over years. That's what exactly
to say that data isn't correct. That data could be correct.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. So, but when you cast it negatively, he's a bully at the end of the day.
Yeah.
He just bullied a bunch of people. So I don't know.
Yeah.
What's it in England right now as far as, cause I just recently read something. You guys have your own kind of Area 51 going on there. There was something about a base. The guy, so it's this guy on YouTube, and I'm very selective about who I listen to because it takes me a little while. I'm like, I don't know. I feel like this guy's just trying to get some likes. But I heard him mention something about a base out there where it's pretty hush hush, and then he is assuming that it goes below ground several levels, largely. And I'll share the link with you after the podcast.
Yeah, great, thank you.
But so, ufology in UK. How is it busier than America or no?
I think on average through MUFON, we will get on average about 40 cases a month. Okay, so if you was to put us on the rankings table, we're directly behind the US. Generally, we're sitting second or third. Sometimes it's a bit of a toss-up between us and Canada, but in terms of the amount of sightings that we get, it's around about 40 a month. So in terms of ufology within the UK itself, within the media, hardly ever discussed. I mean, the British Broadcasting Corporation, or what we like to call the British Bullshit Corporation, because basically it's just propaganda most of the time. Even the more offbeat channels, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, those that are a little bit more edgy in their documentaries, tend not to get too involved in the UFO phenomena itself, which I find interesting but also concerning, because it's like it's a media blackout without it being classed as a media blackout, if that makes sense.
It does.
It's kind of it's so in plain sight that you can't see it.
You know, it makes me, so here's, I don't know about UK, but in America, an example, this hurricane that we have coming, when they speak about it in the news, it's not like, all right, listen, there's a hurricane coming. No, it's like, hurricane coming. They make it really dramatic, right? They want to incite fear in people. It's what keeps people, I guess in their mind, what keeps us watching the news. It's what made me stop watching it. But when it comes to things like ufology or even the paranormal, or let's stretch this out. Even conspiracy theories that come to light to be real, and there's a lot of examples of conspiracies back in the day. One being the CIA experiments with people like Charles Manson. I thought that was horseshit, and then you find out it's true. They actually experimented with this guy. He's been in and out of jail for any other human being went to jail for what he went to jail for. The amount of times we don't get out, we get sentenced long term. So anyway, when you hear about things like that. Then you get to the news and what you mean by blackout but not blackout, I totally get it. They'll speak about it when obviously when they're prompted to do so, when it fits them, and then it's like it doesn't exist anymore.
The interesting thing is in the late 2017, when the article came out in the New York Post and that on the Tic Tac, that got 2 minutes of airtime on the BBC the following day, because I was tracking it, because I saw it come out on the web, and I thought, this has got to be on the news. This has to be all over the news. US Navy footage, it's got to be all over the news. 2 minutes on the BBC. That was it. Nothing since.
Huh. That's crazy.
That's 5 years ago.
I mean, that's crazy. That's a huge story.
Massive story. The Calvine photo that we spoke about at the top of the podcast there, Adam, that was a huge story. That's not even been covered. And that's actually homegrown British,
I gotta ask, because Britain is very strong religious background, the lineage tying back to kings and queens of the day, where the crown and the religious things are the equals. I wonder how much of that plays a factor, because I know in Korea, even in South Korea, which is somewhat liberated in comparison to its other half. Yeah. Even their government shut this. You could report a UFO to the government out there, and they all together will shut it down. It will never make news. It'll never make TV. Never. No. If one landed in the middle of a park there, got out and greeted everyone, it still wouldn't make the news. So I think
it'd be the same here.
It's a scary thought. Here in America, forget it. It's like people hurt themselves trying to get these stories out. The drawback is how much of it's real or not. It gets to be, it's tricky. Michael, is tricky, man.
Yeah, I really do not understand why in the UK we spend so much time suppressing the freedom of thought.
I don't know
when it comes via the media. Rather, I mean, you did the late passing of Queen Elizabeth II. That had a huge media coverage, quite rightly so. She was monarch for 70 years, and that got covered on every channel, and that was a monumentous event. And literally all of the news stopped for that 10-day mourning period. There was a lot going on in the world, but we didn't really cover any of it within the UK. And I think this was a prime example of where the media controls the narrative. Everything else got pushed to the back because this took priority. And as a country, we were accepting of that. Good. No, you're absolutely right. By all means, run the reels for 8 or 9 hours a day. Please, do all the analysis about the royal family and what the next stages are. Are we Carolians or are we Carolines? All these conversations, now that we have King Charles III, all of these conversations were replayed. And everybody said, I'm accepting that. For 10 days, I don't really care what's going on in the rest of the world because this is about Britain. And I think that's the mindset of the British people.
It it's bothersome. You know, I have a MUFON member, I believe a director from Australia coming on Monday.
No.
I've reached out. I not even me. I was reached out to by someone from Kuwait about ufology, and this here's one that scared me. In Kuwait, this gentleman is telling me that the sightings are pretty frequent over palaces and some of their military installations,
right?
And it's not on the news at all. One of them, he said, was like our Area 51 as far as big news goes, and I have not heard a word of it anywhere. So no. I'm in that position, like I got to vet this guy, make sure I'm not, catching nonsense. But I have the luxury of having pool player friends all over the globe on Facebook.
Right.
And the few I know from Middle East I've kind of, spoken to, they seem to have heard something about what this guy's talking about, but no one else has. So it's being compartmentalized, and then you got to figure who's in charge of their media.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it does. I used to think it was regional. I used to think, well, this type of culture within this type of region obviously is accepting of this type of thinking. But then as I've got older, and you know yourself, Adam, you switch off the bullshit filter as you get older. So you tolerate less in terms of things you want to accept. The realization then dawned on me that actually, no, this isn't regional. It is cultural, but it isn't regional. It is country specific. And that's the difficulty with accepting UFOs, extraterrestrials, and the possibility of life on another planet, because you're not trying to knock it down within a region. You're not trying to knock the walls down within a region. You're trying to knock the walls down country by country.
Right.
And that's difficult.
It is. And, a friend of mine, I've been asked this question too. Like, well, when do you think they're going to land? Like we were talking about earlier. Like, I don't think they're going to. We're far from ready. And if they're going to, like I said, we're going to collapse first, because there's no reason right now for them to even communicate. We're still the study. We're still a project. And when we're doing things like having riots and killing people over their race, and there's two politicians in America where they both believe in the same outcome, but they want to argue with each other anyway. You have multiple organized religions, and each one is right. The other one's not, but this one's right. They're fighting to have the same their God put above the rest. There's no shot that they're going to communicate with us. It just doesn't. It's not practical, even at the government level. Like, I don't even think they're communicating with our government. I don't think that at all. I think that if they were, think about what we're saying here. They came to an agreement to use the government's like, all right, we agree to let you take some people and do experiments. In return, we need technology. That's nonsense. We're still using fossil fuel. There's no way we shook hands with that.
No. I completely agree. 100% agree, Adam. And I think there's too much narrative going around to the fact that the government know a lot more than they're letting on.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think the government do know a lot more than they know. Absolutely, right? They've got data on it. They know what's happening.
They probably have better data, more footage of it. They probably have an idea of what they're up against, but pride makes it so they won't admit to it outright, because imagine the U.S. government or the U.K. government saying, all right, look, UFOs are real, aliens are real. And the first thing people are going to ask, like, how do you protect us from them? We can't.
And that's when social breakdown goes down. It's like, right. What do you mean you can't? Yeah, can you do anything? No.
Yeah, because you and I are pretty sane people, but how many people out there are paranoid? Like, no way, dude, we got to have a revolution. There's no way I'm getting rid of my cell phone. We're going off the grid. We're going to start our own military or whatever. People. That's humanity. It's how we behave. We've exampled this a lot over years. So
mob behavior, right? And we see mob behavior. I mean, even recently this week within the UK, there's been riots in a city called Leicester in the UK, and that's been between people from Pakistan and from India.
Huh.
And they're right next door to each other, and obviously there's countries they don't get on. The bizarre thing is that up until recently they actually coexisted in the same city and really kind of stay away from each other, but something triggered an incident triggered these sudden riots between these two cultures. And it's that kind of reactive behavior that I think not only governments are worried about, but how we should be worried as humans as well.
I agree.
In terms of the mob behavior,
Yeah, I mean, look how beautiful Ireland. Ireland's a beautiful place.
Yeah.
But they went to war with each other. They both believe in the same God, the same Son of God, but their rules are slightly different. And the result, we're going to lob missiles at each other.
It was the troubles that happened in the late in the 70s from Bloody Sunday 1971 moving onwards. This is still going to take 2 or 3 generations to filter out.
Yeah.
Now, this generation is more how would I say it? Not woke, but they're more in touch with reality than previous generations. But the factions are still there. You still have the Unionists, you still have the Catholics, you still have Orange Day Parade, you still have the violence at the Orange Day Parade, you still have the sectarianism that goes on. And if you're an extraterrestrial life form looking down on that, and even if you take Northern Ireland, which is a very, very, very small portion of the global population, and how that hatred can breed literally in the same square mile, then, you've really got to step back and think, these guys have got a long way to go before they evolve.
Yeah, imagine you're in a ship above the planet. You're doing a study, right? And you look down like, hey, man, look at this. What's going on? These guys are blowing each other up. Over what? Let's evaluate them. Well, they have the same religion, basically. They believe in the same God, basically. Yeah. The difference is some set of rules and territory. And so in their opinion, like, well, did we communicate with them? No way. No shot. They're crazy. But let's study them and put a channel on them because, the people back home will find this interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Welcome to the Northern Ireland channel.
Yeah, it's insanity. And then here in America, forget it, man. Our politics alone scare me.
Yeah.
I literally watched 2 politicians on either side of the fence, literally preaching the same great idea, but they were arguing with each other and trying to disprove one another, although they were preaching the same. If you break down their vocabulary of what it is they're talking about, it's the same idea. It's a great one too, but because it's on opposing sides, there's no shot they're going to come into agreement on this. And the victims of it are the people of the country,
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I don't think it's really any different here in the UK. And I think when we look at the politics of the Conservative Party versus the Labour Party versus the Liberal Democrats versus the Scottish National Party, and then the list goes on and on, it's easy to be in opposition because you just say the opposite to what the actual leader the leading party says. So you don't like their idea, you just say it's not going to work. Sometimes you will support them, but it'll stick in your throat, and there'll be some caveats around that. And then, in those particular situations where you both do agree on the same thing, like let's say Ukraine, for example, we'll both agree it, but there's 2 different thoughts as to why we agree to support Ukraine.
Yeah.
And it's similar to what you've just said, is that you're basically conveying the same idea, but because you're from 2 different parties, you think you want to convey that differently, but it's the same result.
I want to treat aliens. If let's say we're watching, we just come to this planet. I want to behave like a child. I want to have those childlike question, right? Mm-hmm. So we get here and we see there's a country on one side of the globe. They live a certain way. We see there's a country on another side of the globe. They live a certain way too, but they hate each other. And then you have to ask like a kid, well, why do they hate each other? Like, well, they have different belief systems. Why does it matter? They're on the opposite sides of the planet. So, and you have to answer like, well, it's because it could affect the world. Why? Well, that's a great question. Why would it affect the world? Why is what we do in America so threatening to other countries, right? Oh, because they're freedom and we don't want to like have our people see it and they're going to want it. Well, no kidding, they're going to want it. But it's your country, so you can't blame us, blow us. It's senseless acts of violence. It all comes down to control. That's really what it comes down to, is control.
It does. And you look at Rua as an example, the landing at Rua, and 62 children that I think they actually saw all this craft land at Rua. They saw beings get out this craft. 3 or 4 of those children had direct telepathic communication with these beings. Teachers saw it as well. And then the Harvard psychologist, and his name escapes me, but a Harvard psychologist went down there, did all the interviews with all the different kids separately, who obviously all corroborated the same thing. You have a case there, absolute provenance of a direct, close encounter, the fourth kind, with an extraterrestrial life form. I found it interesting. Let's go put ourselves in front of some kids. Why? Because they're childlike minds.
Right.
Because they're going to be more accepting of what they're seeing. Because none of them ran. They all went up to take a look.
Right. And consider where that's located, when that happened. It was John Mack, by the way, I believe, right?
John Mack, thank you. That's it, Adam. Yeah, John Mack.
And so they go to a part of the world where they're basically untainted by horseshit, if we're going to say it out loud, right?
Yep.
They're very peaceful people. They don't, and then in that era, there's no internet. So they don't know the hatred around the world. Like in America, a lot of disgusting things happen on the building of this country, right? And in the history of this country, in the UK, look at the amount of wars fought over ideology. Just ideology alone. And then you have a portion of the world where they're just really kind of carefree and laxed, and they're childlike minds. Perfect place to try to make some contact.
Oh, absolutely. But again, I think that the most frustrating thing for me about Rua is the fact that, again, even with the provenance of John Mack, even with the provenance of all those children and the teachers, and moving 30 years on since that incident has occurred, and then they've re-interviewed those children, stories are exactly the same. Nothing has changed for them. It's still been a life-changing experience. There's still no acceptance that this actually happened.
I'll tell you, the sad part is there's good evidence there.
Yeah.
Right? There's better evidence of that than there is of angels. So
100%.
And so if we as a, that's the thing, I have relatives, man, and they talk to me like, well, why are you so interested in this subject? There's no proof of this. I'm like, wait a minute. Every Sunday you go somewhere to worship something you have no clue is real or not. But there's videos, there's eyewitnesses, there's actually metamaterial. We're now finding more material. Like, there's more evidence of this than there is what you're believing in, and these are the same people that make people of science and of experience. They push those people into a corner. These are the same people, the people with bad evidence who believe wholeheartedly in something versus people who have actual tangible evidence. And it's not even a belief system. It's more of a science position, right? We want to learn more.
Yeah, exactly. I had a conversation a few years ago with a Catholic priest, actually, and we got onto the subject of UFOs, and then consequently angels and demons. And I can remember having the conversation with the father, and I did say to him, I says, this is not obviously in the greatest respect, Father, says you really have no direct evidence to support the existence of God, Jesus Christ, angels, or demons. And his response was, faith is the evidence that we have. And I found that a really interesting answer, because I said, I find that interesting, Father, because faith to you is not the same as faith to somebody else. Faith in an individual versus faith in a religious movement. There's a lot more moving parts there. But do you think that faith is enough for you to categorically say that with 100% certainty, because of all the evidence that you have, that God exists, angels exist, and demons exist? And his response to that was, I will just continue my life in the faith and service of God, and I'll find out at the end.
Wow. Blind faith, I said this a lot. There's a lot of examples of blind faith, and one strong example is blind faith will fly into a building and kill a lot of people. You do that out of blind faith. If you, like, I spoke about it on the podcast, like the one of the people that was high ranking with Osama bin Laden, they were interviewing this guy, and he was hell bent on, I did this for Allah, et cetera, et cetera. And then they let him read the Quran in its entirety, and he started to weep because he had no idea. He blindly took the leadership's word for it, and by faith committed his acts of crime. And so when it gets to ufology and questioning, and again, if I go to a room and I say, and this is what I'm starting to find as a fact, today's generations, the children of today, if I sit them down in a room like aliens are real, we have proof. They're behind that. They're going to be, but if you go to those kids like, well, angels are real and I have proof, they're going to show me. You know?
Yeah. No, you do. You know what? That's a really, really valid point, because you go to UFO conference, doesn't matter whether it's a symposium for MUFON or it's a UFO conference in any other country. Somebody will rack up a load of PowerPoint slides and they'll say, here's a photo of this. Here's a photo of this UFO. This is where it was taken. This is the person that took it. Here's the video recordings. Here's the radar data. Here's the flight data. Here's all the information here. Here's 10 or 15 different photographs, and here's 2 videos. Now, I've never been to a religious conference where they brought up a PowerPoint presentation and gone, well, here's God, here's some photos here, oh, here's Jesus Christ over here, here's a video of him here, here's a couple of his angels, and here's some of the data to back that up, you know, when he was flying through, you know, Norway or something like that. It's just, you just don't see it. And then, you know, the religious the religious sector of the world will say, well, you know, where's your evidence? Where's my evidence?
There's too much
drowning in it.
Exactly.
You know, it's an embarrassment of riches.
We have pilots, and look, at the very minimum, these are pilots flying expensive aircraft around, and we're also, so people know, they have to get a psychological evaluation for even considering to fly one of these things, and not just once, annually. You know, they have to make sure these people are sound, they have a sound mind, their faculties are clear. These aren't bullshitters, and so you can see David Fravor when he speaks about his event. Yeah. It's not that he's like trying to convince you. He just like, he's in awe of it still. To this day, still in awe of what he saw. He's a fighter pilot. And his biggest thing is, how do I fly one of these? That's his biggest concern. I want to fly it. So take that. And I'm glad you said it. I had another person tell me, a person of religion, say, why is there no proof of angels for you? Well, they're pure energy and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, we have NORAD. We would have detected this. So just by what you're telling me, we would have found this on the very minimum. We would have picked it up on infrared.
Yeah.
You know, so
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I know I'm lucky to know a few commercial airline pilots, and I was speaking with one of them only recently 3 months ago, and we got onto the subject of UFOs, which we normally get onto because he knows my background and I know his. And this was the first time that he'd actually opened up to me, and you know, and I said to him, look, you know, you spend a lot of time on long haul flights. You're in the air for hours on end. You know, you've got to feed your time doing stuff. I know you're monitoring the aircraft, but, you know, you're also having a good look out the window as well. I says, come on, let's just be straight with me. Do you see things that you cannot explain? And his response to me, and this is why I will never name the individual as to who he is, but his response to me was, the more times I look out the window, the more I can't understand what I'm seeing.
I hear that a lot. I
know.
So pilots are some of the people I reach out to pretty often.
Yeah.
You know, again, you know, off podcasts, as often as possible, I should say.
Yeah.
And they say the same thing. Like, there's a lot of anomalies that we come across in flight that we have no clue what they are. We don't jump on the bandwagon where I would say UFOs but I could tell you, one guy said, I could tell you for certain, there's no physics that we're playing with that are doing what I see.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so when you hear this, that's again, we're losing data, you know, because and it's the government and religion made this topic so stigma that we're never going to get proper data. And that's a real, and let's hypothetically say that what's in our atmosphere and what's watching us, what if they do decide to become aggressive one day? Because of all the shun, we don't have proper data to analyze. We don't have the private sector minds to come, because most great ideas come from private sector. It's not government controlled. We're not going to have all these great minds linking together to say, well, how would we combat this? Because we have no data. You know, it's this we see. So an example of this is you rewind time a very long time ago to the Egyptian times, right? because they refused to acknowledge leadership of other countries. They thought, we're all powerful, et cetera, et cetera. They were invaded and taken over by a foreign leader blindly because they lacked they didn't want to open their minds and say, well, let's have a look at this guy and see how would we feed him off or defend ourselves. They didn't do that. And Alexander the Great walked in there and just took over.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't difficult for him. It wasn't difficult for him either.
No, he walked in. It was relevantly easy because his enemy did one thing. They didn't respect his authority or who he was or his existence for that matter. Right?
Yeah,
we're doing the same thing right now. Now, whatever's observing us now, they're peaceful. They're here to observe us. That doesn't mean the next group that comes around eventually is gonna be. And we have
I mean, that's a really great point, Adam. And I think that there's maybe an acceptance, and I think this is where the movie industry has done a great job on. I can count on one hand how many films involved an alien species that was benevolent and kind. I think there's only 3 films I can think of. That the rest of them were, these guys are going to come and kill you.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They're going to take over the world. They're going to do it in a really, really nasty way too. I mean, they're not just going to turn on me; they're going to blow crap up, and they're going to, they're going to get hold of you, and they're going to use you. War of the Worlds, typical example. They're going to use your blood, and then they're going to give them a cold. But that didn't work out too well for them. But literally every other film is based around the fact that aliens are a threat to humanity, not a redeemer of humanity.
Yeah, we have a lot of pre-programs in us, huh? A lot.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Huge amount. Going back to the early 50s, you look at some of the programs, the UFOs in the early 50s, even though, quite frankly, in the B movies, I still love watching them because they're just so bad, they're great. But, tin men just walking out of UFOs, first thing they do, pull up a ray gun,
yep.
Kill everybody. The day the earth stood still. Everything like that. Everything is geared around the fact, constantly programming humanity. They're not here to be nice. They're not here to be nice.
A lot of that same programming is, you could see that exampled in just world politics in movies too. I didn't realize this not too long ago, but Russia is the subject of enemy in a lot of movies, where in Russia, we're the subject of enemy in a lot of movies. It's a lot of pre-programming. And unfortunately, that does resonate in the minds of people.
It does, which is why, Russia really didn't have too much difficulty initially getting everything pushed through the Politburo for them to start walking into Ukraine, which initially they thought was going to be a walk in the park. But now you've got this West versus East thing now. Now you've got the whole of the West against Russia. Yep. Because now we're all pre-programmed to say, well, Russia's the bad guy here. All right, Russia was the bad guy that walked into Ukraine, but all that past programming is now serving as well, because now the whole of NATO are getting behind Ukraine. And that, when it comes to the extraterrestrial agenda, it is exactly the same. These aliens turn up. Oh my God, they're here to kill us. Nobody has ever stopped to think, that actually, what? These may not actually be as bad guys as you've made them out to be, but you've tried to program me over the past 50 years that they are.
It's true. I mean, a lot of Russian troops that are captured, they don't really know the story of what's going on.
No.
They just know they had to go. They think that they were under threat. Here's where we're going to find out. I think in the 1940s, America dropped a couple of nukes on Japan.
In Japan.
And so this happens, and our observers. Now, can you imagine you're in your laboratory and you have a big ant farm in the background, and it's going pretty well. They're having wars. They're having no big deal, business as usual. And you're sitting in a living room and you hear boom, and like a third of the ant farm is just destroyed at once. You're like, holy shit, what was that?
Yeah.
So now we got to observe this. What's going on with our colony here?
Yeah.
I think we dropped those bombs. We caught their attention because it really amplified the amount of sightings around military installations and power factories with our observers, right?
Yeah.
And so time will tell, because I don't think that they would prevent nuclear war. I said this on the podcast a few times. I don't think they would stop it because they love us. I think they would stop it because, well, we need our program. We need our subject study. This is an entertainment channel for a lot of planets. We got to stop them. That would be their only real motivation. And it makes me wonder, if we were to utilize nuclear weapons now, would they intervene because the study could be disrupted? Would they intervene because entertainment could be disrupted? That's the question.
It's a great question too. And I think, the threat of the use of tactical nuclear weapons. I mean, nuclear weapons are nuclear weapons, whether they're tactical or not, they still have the same result. And I think I have to agree with you, Adam. I think their intervention would be on the basis that this is going to screw up what we're observing here. And, you can't allow yourself to get to the point where you just become completely extinct because of your own stupidity. So, we need to step in, and then hopefully that's like an enlightened moment for humanity. However they step in, whether it's very obvious or whether it isn't very obvious, but you see hundreds of cases of UFOs over nuclear bases, especially within the United States as well as the UK, where they're basically just flown up to a base and then they've just shut all the nukes down. And they've shut them down, saying, listen, you think you've got all this control over them, computerized control over these nukes. It's nothing for us to just rock up and then just switch them all off. So just as a warning, don't use them, because if you do use them, we're probably going to rock up and we're going to switch them off.
Yeah, I mean, that would definitely be the motivation. We almost had a third world war because of UFOs. I was reading this too. When I read this case about a UFO in Russia messing with their nukes, and they were accusing America. Yeah, we almost had a war over this. And you want to say this is fantastic until you read the actual data behind it. It's from U.S. government and the Russian government, that they actually, that's a scary thought. And it's not like the observers did it because, well, let's see if we can start a problem. They didn't know. They're observing what our weapons were after that 1940s incident. They got to know what's going on with their projects. So there's a lot of moving parts to it. A lot.
Yeah, 100%. Understand, and will continue to be as we move forward, as the geopolitical situation changes, which I think it's unfortunately is going to radically change probably over the remainder of 2022. I think things will get better. Things will get worse before they get better. I sometimes, when I'm contemplating at night about ufology and my own belief system around it, I do sometimes think to myself, maybe you do as well, Adam, we sit there and think, I wonder what it would take for them to just go, enough is enough. I
think what we set up, what we were just touching on, will be it. Yeah, I think when we get to the point of collapse, because again, we see this in small, we could scale this down to laboratories here when we're trying to make cures for cancer. We're using rats and nonsense. And when we start seeing full colonies of our rats dying, it's like, what do we do to prevent this? We got to stop this because the study must go on. I think it's the same scale.
I think so. I think so.
And if we, or something, or could be something, could be a comet or an asteroid's heading this way. They have to, we can't let the study go. Now we have to get not only in contact with them and try to give them proper measures against this. We have to figure out a way to prevent this from being catastrophic, not just for this generation, but for generations of the planet, the health of the planet. This planet's life-giving. Before these people were here, there were other creatures running around, more oxygen in the atmosphere, larger animals are running around. Yeah. Prior to that, who knows what kind of beings were here 1 billion or 2 billion years ago? We know it's here 60-something millions ago because there's a fossil record, but would there be a fossil? That. Yeah. Would there be a fossil record from 2 billion years ago if they were just another, like, say, mankind, an intelligent species? No. We'd be lost in the sands of time.
Yes, exactly. And I think I read somewhere that apparently humanity has gone extinct 6 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
And something like 6 times it's gone extinct or something.
I believe that. I mean, it makes sense. It
does.
The planet, again, like we said earlier, the planet's part of this construct. It's almost like mechanical. It's going to do what it does best. All right, so all life just died here for this reason. Let's repopulate with a new kind of atmosphere, more oxygen or less oxygen, and we'll see what comes of that. But at the end of the day, because of where it's located in its star system, its solar system, it's meant to be life-giving.
Yeah.
And so whatever form it takes, the new study begins. And if our observers are here, at the end of the day, well, damn, the human project's dead. Let's see what comes next. Or let's plant some seeds down there and see what happens if we just, I don't know, because imagine if we threw some of our bacteria on one of these moons that has its own atmosphere, what happens over the course of millions of years? Who knows? Yeah.
I think you what you say there, Adam, I think is a fascinating concept, and I think over time that will actually probably be borne out to be true. The 200-300 years time when we'll look back and we'll go, do you know what? Adam actually raised a valid point there, and the guy saw ahead, and then you'll be renamed Nostradamus, and then we'll go from there. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The observation, the lab theory, I think has always been always been top of my list in terms of this is why they don't intervene, because they're just here to study.
Right. Yeah. We already know that we contaminated the moon and Mars and all our probes. No matter how many steps we take, there's still a contaminant there. We know that's happening. So by sending a probe to these moons with oceans on it, who knows? We might have started the next evolution of intelligent life on another moon or planet millions of years from now. We have no idea.
Quite possibly. Quite possibly. Exactly.
Michael, before we close here, do you want to add?
I think, it's been a really refreshing talk with you, Adam. I think, the whole ufology subject touches on so many things that are even outside of ufology, but at the same time, we're kind of all interconnected. And I think it's been really refreshing to have a conversation with you around the other elements that feed into it rather than just solid ufology as an isolated conversation. So I really appreciate you allowing me to come on the show and for us to chat about that.
Indeed. I appreciate having you on here. I'm going to talk to Michael in post. So anyone listening, good day, good night, whatever it is for you. We're going to talk and see you again.
Great. Thanks, Adam.